So Basil Hawkins was just defeated, and he may have just become the first supernova of the original Subodhi 11 to have been officially taken out of the game. Obviously, I don't mean killed, just that it's possible that Oda's narrative for Hawkins in the New World really was to keep picking sides in an effort to play the best odds, which would end him up on Kaido's crew, where he would ultimately be defeated, closing his storyline, and Hawkins may no longer be prominent in the story of One Piece from here on, as he may just be set to go down with the rest of the Beast Pirates. Now, I think it is very, very easy to write off Hawkins as basically a supernova who didn't pan out to be that impressive or impactful, and I think a lot of readers are no longer interested in this character and haven't been for some time. However, I don't think that's entirely fair, as I think that's skipping over a discussion about this character that we need to have. I am biased, of course, as Hawkins has actually always been the most interesting supernova to me personally, and I believe there's actually a lot to reflect on about him, the ridiculous amount of potential the character had, what could have been, as well as what could still possibly happen. So stick with me and maybe you'll have something more to think about at the end of this retrospective on Basil Hawkins. But before we get into it, make sure to subscribe for more One Piece videos every week. Now, even though I personally believe there may be a lot more to go in the Wano arc, I know most of you all don't believe that, so for the purposes of this video, I'll be speaking with the mindset that Hawkins is basically done for in the Wano arc, and potentially may no longer be a significant player in the One Piece narrative. Now, on paper, if this is the end of the line for Hawkins, then I actually think that as a concept, the storyline Oda crafted for this supernova was pretty cool. If we use Kid as one example of a supernova who came into the New World extremely reckless, headstrong, and sure of himself, and we saw him ultimately get crushed for it, then Hawkins is arguably an example of the other end of the spectrum. His strategy has always been to believe in his own predictions and calculations, to play the absolute safest risk-reward game. As far as we know, Hawkins does not seem to bet against his own predictions. He will take them at face value and go with what has the better odds for his own survival. So in theory, that should allow him to avoid the pitfalls of Kid, of being too headstrong and rushing in blindly. But I suppose what we are being shown through this battle with Killer is that the other side of always going with the safest route and living purely on probability denies you the opportunity to overcome significant odds. So always playing that risk-reward game and solely trusting the odds too much can be the wrong approach as well. Obviously, especially so in a series like One Piece, where there's a heavy emphasis on the main characters defying the odds, where there's a will, there's a way, etc. Of course, again, Kid still exists as a great example of what would have happened to the Straw Hats if they had just run headfirst into the New World, right? So the Straw Hats did have to take the smarter approach for once and train up. So there is some degree of balance to both sides. But yes, in general, I like that we can see the supernovas a little bit as sort of examples of failed approaches to becoming Pirate King. So even if this really is the full plan Oda had for Hawkins, and even if I think that's a good concept for the character, actually honestly a really good theoretical use for a supernova to illustrate the flaw of a certain type of approach or mentality, I would still say that it would have hit a lot harder if we just spent some more time with Hawkins or delved a little deeper into his character. At the moment, it does feel a little bit like Hawkins was just this nerd on the side with a calculator that showed up once in a while, and Killer beating him was basically like, "Shut up, nerd, your calculator doesn't work." And that's the end of it. If we'd gotten some more focus, then maybe Hawkins' philosophy and mindset could have been fleshed out a little more to provide that contrast with, say, Luffy or Kid's mentality, before then ultimately being proven wrong. So simple example with another side character like Bellamy, who actually, forgotten fact, was the first real super rookie we ever heard of in the series. Basically the supernova before we met the actual supernovas. Oda did emphasize Bellamy's way of thinking more and flesh that out a lot more, so that by the end of Jaya, it was made clear that there is a fundamental difference between characters who are willing to bet on dreams and characters who aren't. And there are heavy implications we can take away, that it is because Bellamy thinks the way he does that he can never truly be a great pirate. Whereas with Hawkins, I wonder how many scenes or bits of dialogue for him were left on the cutting room floor, so that at the end of the day, he does just come across as a dude that we can assume Oda was trying to make a point with, but ultimately the point doesn't really come through that strongly, simply because the character has had such minimal focus. So Hawkins, I think, is a good example of cool character concept that maybe didn't come through as strongly as it could have in the story itself, because there's only so much screen time to go around. I strongly hope this is not the end for him, because there's such a valuable lesson Hawkins could take away from all this, and we could see a changed character. But let's keep going. So beyond the actual purpose of his character conceptually in the main story, I feel like a frustration with Hawkins that I personally have is that he felt as though he could have had a lot more impact. So I think a lot of people forget, but if you look through at the origins of Basil Hawkins, how he was introduced, the initial buildup of the character and so on, he really was a standout figure among the supernovas. After the Luffy, Kid, and Law trio, Hawkins was probably the most exciting figure to come out of Sabaody for many readers. There are obvious reasons, such as his extremely high bounty, third among the supernovas only behind Luffy and Kid, as well as Hawkins' design as the sort of magician of the dark arts. And while you may have seen characters with designs like this frequently in other series, what really stood out about Hawkins is that you don't see this type of design in One Piece at all. He stood out largely because this whole persona seems really out of place even in the One Piece world. And that extended to how he behaved throughout the Sabaody arc. All the other supernovas are panicking in a frenzy, many of them responding and acting how you would expect angry pirates to act. But Hawkins was completely unfazed, the only supernova who couldn't care less that an admiral was right in front of him. And even though Kizaru did end up destroying all of the supernovas effortlessly, Hawkins at least held out ever so slightly better than the rest due to the nature of his abilities. Even all the way up till the end of pre-timeskip, Hawkins just always seemed as though he was never worried, never affected, essentially this mysterious enigma who always seemed to know he would be fine, who always seemed in control. Even as the post-timeskip started, we did hear that Hawkins was one of the more noteworthy supernova making waves in the New World. So what changed exactly? That's the thing, nothing really changed. I think from my perspective over time, it just began to feel as though this highly enigmatic figure who always seemed to know what he was doing, it turned out to not really have that much more underneath that persona. Kaido dropped in front of him. Hawkins saw that's where the better odds were at, and Hawkins seems to have been content with that just being his role from then on. It's not necessarily good or bad, Oda didn't have to do that much with this character, and maybe this was simply always the plan for Hawkins from day one, but I just wanted to remind people a little bit of the Basil Hawkins that once was. You know, a pirate that once seemed like he could legitimately be a dark horse in this upcoming supernova race. Now, the one real big piece of Hawkins' character that I think will be sorely missed and that we unfortunately never got to see the full potential of was his actual abilities, both his Devil Fruit and his Tarot cards. Because Hawkins seems like he had very possibly one of the most complex and layered ability packages ever seen in One Piece. I mean, there are 3 sides to his powers, and each one is extremely interesting on paper. So obviously the Strawman abilities. Creating voodoo dolls of others has so many uses, redirecting damage away from yourself, but also of course defeating enemies by holding their loved ones hostage, or even potentially making a voodoo doll of your opponent if given the right opportunity. But on top of voodoo dolls, Hawkins himself could transform into and summon a giant nightmarish Strawman to fight for him. I think just the Strawman abilities alone would have been a cool ability package for Oda to give a single character. But then Hawkins also has this other side of predictions and foresight. And here's where it gets tricky, because Hawkins makes his predictions using these tarot cards, but obviously tarot cards alone can't just tell the future with exact percentage chances. From everything we know about hockey nowadays and varying abilities to predict the future, it is very, very, very possible that Hawkins has always had some degree of future sight, but it likely functions a little differently than, say, Luffy or Katakuri, who can see the immediate future. It seems as though if Hawkins sits down and channels his abilities with tarot cards, he can see shades of probabilities of, for example, of life or death. He actually really liked seeing the possibility of death or not in particular. He knew he wouldn't die against Kizaru, he saw Luffy's chances of survival at Marineford, he saw Luffy's chances again at the start of Wano, and Killer's chances during their battle, etc. Right? So death or survival, that seems to be actually his favorite thing to predict, and it's a bit more specific than the other Future Sight users in the series, as Hawkins can choose what he wants to find out about, but at the same time, Hawkins has less immediate combat use out of this ability, since it seems as though he has to kind of sit down and crunch the numbers. So yet again, a really interesting type of ability, unlike anything we've seen before, as characters with traditional Future Sight on one end can, on command, clearly see the immediate future a few seconds ahead of time. Whereas on the other end, you have characters like Madame Charlie, who can actually see visions decades ahead of time, but not on command. And then somewhere in the middle, you have Hawkins, who has his own twist on it, where he can sit down and guess at certain probabilities of events without knowing for sure whether they will happen or not. So yet another extremely unique ability given to Hawkins, and then finally his tarot cards themselves, which tie the two sides of this package together in a really cool way. On the one hand, they help him predict and read the future, so he's like a magician consulting his cards. But on the other hand, they also channel his strawman abilities to perform different actions based on chance. So a card like Tower can foresee destruction, so predicting the future, whereas a card like the Hierophant allows the strawman to chase his enemies, so aiding in combat. So that's a really unique combination of abilities for One Piece, as most characters tend to have pretty straightforward abilities that do one thing. It's just that characters can sort of stretch that into a variety of uses you wouldn't think of. Whereas Hawkins actually has an inherently very diverse set of abilities that work together in a pretty cool triangle that fit perfectly with his character design. There's just so much I wish we had gotten to know more about his abilities. Some confirmation of whether the tarot cards really are being mixed with observation haki, or if that's just speculation on my end. What cards does Hawkins have that allow him to, say, fight past his natural limits as he suggested? Did Hawkins ever draw the best card in his deck, or did we only ever get to scratch the surface of what he could do? The fact that not only are there so many tarot cards to draw from, but even just whether or not a card is reversed or upright adds a new twist to the effect that inherently adds more levels to what the full range of Hawkins' abilities could be or could have been. So all in all, when I'm talking about the tragedy of Basil Hawkins, I don't really mean that Oda wasted the character. This may have simply been what was always meant to be for the character. I just mean that Hawkins certainly felt, at one point in the story, like he was destined for more. And it's just interesting to look back and reflect on how some of these supernovas started and where they ended up. That said, I still hope and believe that there is more in store for Hawkins. I just wanted to talk about if this really was the end, and if you enjoyed this video, then definitely like, comment, and subscribe.